Hello and welcome to Media Musings. Looks like we have Doc Fearsome in the chat, and of course, hello to anyone who's lurking or might be watching in the future. And apparently, what's up with Doc is his blood pressure.
Hi, Doc. How are you?
Yeah. So today we're talking.
Hey, Santi.
Oh, and Santi the same. Good morning. And though, Hissy did say that she was going to be here last week, she unfortunately can't make it because she's not feeling too well. So you must all do your duty and flood her Twitter with wholesome gifs and pictures to help her feel better. And she knows I'm doing this.
I'm sure she'll enjoy it.
Yeah. So today we're talking horror. Technically we're focusing on gothic horror, but I'm very well, open to expanding the topic to horror in general. Perhaps even talking a little bit about the election, though probably not.
Are you suggesting that Trump is an eldritch horror?
His wig might be. Yeah. I don't think Trump himself is an eldritch horror. However, he could very well be just a meat suit being puppeted by one.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I'm just saying I'm not saying that that's the case. I'm just saying we just don't know.
We just don't know. That's the most honest answer any person can give. So if we're talking about eldritch horrors,
yeah. There is technically another stream for that. One that was already produced. We did in January when Color Out of Space came out. We did an episode on H.P. Lovecraft.
Yes, but I mean, this is Halloween. You can't leave that alone in Halloween. So
yeah,
the eldritch horrors of Cthulhu and the other old gods.
And your Pennywise.
Oh, Pennywise, yeah, definitely.
Well, because see, that's the thing about Stephen King. It that I don't like about Stephen King is the fact that Stephen King, when he's doing his Stephen King thing, he's brilliant. But in a few of his books, at the end, he tries to turn it into Lovecraft, and he always drops the ball on it.
Stephen King's Lovecraft.
Yeah.
The Lovecraft you have when you can't quite afford Lovecraft.
Yeah. Well, his psychological horror is like crazy scary. Yeah.
Misery freaked me out when I first saw it. I
cannot read Misery again.
No, it's too real.
Yeah.
It is just so real, and you just no.
Well,
I mean, you can,
even in even in his like more surreal stuff, the scariest bits are always the people.
Yeah.
Like for instance, in Under the Dome, the dome isn't that scary in and of itself, even when they find out that it was put there by some elder god child who is just watching,
playing with them.
Yeah, who is playing with them. What's scary is how the town goes all Lord of the Flies.
Yeah. I mean, Stephen King's got a thing for that about talking about how the true horrors in the world are actually the people.
Yeah.
I mean, even in it, what the kids are prepared to do to try and beat Pennywise is pretty horrific.
Yeah. Well, and also, you know, what's scary, the scariest things in it aren't really Pennywise. It's all the ways that their home lives have fucked them up.
Yeah.
And Pennywise only like really amplifies that because he's preying on their fears and psychological mishaps. But honestly, we could do a whole other episode on Stephen King. Which reminds me, I really need to read Dr. Sleep and watch Stanley Kubrick's The Shining so I can watch the adaptation of Dr. Sleep.
That just sounds complicated.
Yeah. Well, because the thing is, the adaptation of Dr. Sleep is like half based off, like lifts a lot from the Dr. Sleep book, which is a sequel to The Shining, which I've already read. And I like to read books that, like, if I know the movie is an adaptation of a book, I like to read the book first.
Yeah, you're not as disappointed that way around.
Yeah.
So having said that, now I'm going to talk about She Who Must Not Be Named.
Yeah. Hold on. We have a banner for that.
We do. But yeah. I'm not gonna whip her. I'm actually gonna whip the production company, because the last book, the fight scene at the end of it between Harry and Voldemort is better in the book than it is in the movie. Yeah. The movie is incredibly disappointing.
Also,
comparison.
Did you put your name in the goblins of fire? He said calmly.
Yeah. It's just so over the top. Everything in the movie is just so over the top. In all of them. Yeah. In comparison to the books. And I'm not saying the books are particularly well written. They're good. They're good books for teenagers, but I mean, as an adult reading them, they're kind of like Twilight.
Well, growing up as I didn't have anything to do with Harry Potter until I was already in my 20s.
Yeah.
And my like, I've said it again, I've said it before, I'll say it again, I'll probably say it until I die. My opinion on Harry Potter is, if I had read it when I was the target, in the age demographic, because I grew up in that time period, I probably would have enjoyed it more.
Yeah, as an adult, it was a lot. I still read them. Yeah. I read them as an adult, obviously, but they're okay. That kind of fantasy thing, I like that sort of thing. But there are better books out there that do the same similar stories, and it's very easy to pull it apart because some of it's so bad.
But we're not necessarily, talking about Harry Potter, though I will always and forever prefer the other wizard named Harry.
Oh, same. Yeah. The better wizard.
Yeah.
The real wizard.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't need a wand.
No. Well, technically, you could say his blasting rod is a wand.
Yeah, but he can still do stuff without it.
Yeah. He can do stuff without it, but it's easier if he has his staff or his wand or his bracelet.
because that helps him focus his magic, but he can do his magic without it. Whereas, you know, what's magical? Is it actually the wizards or is it the wands in Harry Potter? I mean, yeah, I suppose because some of them can do magic without them.
Well, yeah, but the wizards, it's basically like they're issued training wheels that they never learn to function without. It is the way it seems.
Yeah.
Also, before we get back on topic, I will just say again, Harry Dresden's method of choice for fighting another spellcaster is brilliant. Just throw the biggest, flashiest spell at them, and while they're dealing with that, close the distance and turn it into a fist fight.
Yeah. But I mean, he was always about practical responses to things.
Yeah.
He used his magic when he had to, and outside of that, he was very practical in what he did. But also quite brilliant.
And I guess we are somewhat on topic because, especially when it comes to Dresden Files, urban fantasy is kind of like a bastard stepchild of horror in some ways.
But Doc, haven't you read Terry Pratchett? Because the wizard staff has a knob on one end.
Yeah. Yeah. So I forget which one, but in one of the Dresden Files books, the other apprentice under Harry's master chides him for still shows up again, and during one of their interactions, she chides him for still using phallic foci.
I love Harry Dresden.
Yeah,
he is awesome.
Yes.
If we're gonna, there's a lot of you've got ghosts in Dresden.
Yeah.
And ghosts are not necessarily lacking in power in Dresden either. They're not just spectral bodies. They can be quite dangerous. So there's quite a few interesting things like that in the Dresden Files. So I love the taking the house out of normal reality to protect everybody, and then they can't get out of it.
Yeah,
I know that's from the TV series, but it was the one episode from the TV series I actually really liked.
And of course, Deadbeat is basically a zombie apocalypse book where they stop the zombie apocalypse before it actually happens.
Yeah, so we've moved into zombies and that.
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned Twilight before, so shall we talk about non-sparkly vampires?
Well, actually, yeah, because I have just started reading Dracula.
Yeah.
And hold on.
Doc, you need to read the books. Yeah, the books are better.
Yeah, and also, if you have problems with keeping track of just of reading like books, you know, like if it's like a time issue, or if you just have trouble reading just lines of text, there are audiobooks of every Dresden Files novel, and there are graphic novelizations of the first 3.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I'd love to see them. That'd be awesome.
And also a couple of like independent graphic novels, like side adventures that Harry went on.
The TV series is Dresden in name more than in context.
Yeah,
content. It is the books are quite different.
Yeah, from what I've from what I've seen of the TV series, the only thing they got accurate was Bob.
I like Bob.
Yeah.
Well, Dresden himself, where he lives and basically what he does is right, but the ongoing plot in the story is very different.
Like the casting and the character and the acting
was
basically spot on,
which is such a shame that they didn't do the story well. Because what's his name? I mean, the guy who plays Dresden ended up playing the cop in The Flash,
in Arrow.
Oh, sorry, Arrow, not Flash.
Yeah,
you're right.
Yeah,
and I can't remember what the actor's name is, but he was
Paul Blackthorne.
Paul Blackthorne. He was brilliant. He was almost the perfect image of what you'd think Dresden was.
Yeah, like
it was.
If there was a Dresden Files movie with a good script and a good book thumper, and either book thumper or book slapper, I forget what the actual term is. But it's something that no adaptations have, but every adaptation should have is someone who knows the book and is there to smack the script writer when they want to screw things up.
Sometimes it's done for a reason, though. Sometimes it's done because the episodic nature of TV means that you can't cover the story in full. So often TV shows do have to carry the story slightly differently. But I think they made too many changes in Dresden. Yeah, they could have stood close to the story and still pulled out the episodic pieces, and I would have felt better. But having said that, I really like the TV show. You just got to remember that the books is very different to the books.
Yeah. And adaptation is always like an art of a fine balancing act, because you do need to make changes to transition it to a better medium, or not better medium, a different medium. Yeah. And but you still need to keep what makes the work work. There's also instances where you change so much that your adaptation is really more of its own thing.
Yeah, which is kind of what's happened with Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
It is significantly different from the books.
And sure thing, Doc. I think you're in the Midnight or the Mid-America group. The link should be in there.
Oh, it's in there, is it? I thought just the No, you didn't. Oh yeah, you did.
Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, like for instance, Stephen King famously hated Stanley Kubrick's adaptation of The Shining.
Did he?
Yeah, because he in his opinion, it changed too much. And so, which is why in the 90s, Stephen King tried to do his own TV miniseries.
Yeah, that went well.
Yeah. Like kind of steering things back.
Hey, Sammy.
Back to horror, and hello, Sammy. But, and of course, back to non-Twilight vampires. Because
we got sidetracked again.
Yes.
By the best wizard of all.
Yeah. So I'm, as I said before, I'm reading, I just started Dracula a couple of days ago. And I got it off, hashtag not sponsored, Project Gutenberg. Hello,
hi, Doc.
Dr. Pearson.
Hello.
How was you?
Oh, I've been better. I actually wasn't going to hop on because I'm kind of in a shitty mood, but I don't know, I'm starting to feel a little better, and hopefully I can, add a little something positive to your stream. So
yeah,
Cool.
and I can tell you from because I just read like the first chunk with Jonathan, where Jonathan Harker, goes to Castle Dracula. The painfully, almost suicidally oblivious horror protagonist was a thing was a thing much before horror flicks. Because like Jonathan Harker must have been colorblind for all the red flags he kept missing.
It is very much like that.
Yeah,
but I mean, Dracula itself could be more of a murder mystery than a supernatural story if you actually take it in the context of it. I mean, it's both, but
yeah. Well, yeah, like a lot of like early gothic horror, like can kind of be like kind of straddles genres. Not because they were written as cross-genre works, but they were written before clearly defined genres were really a thing. Like, for instance, a lot of people say Frankenstein, a lot of people figure Frankenstein is a horror story, and it does have horror elements, but it's more of a science fiction story.
It is, but it was written.
Yeah,
I mean, the story of the story is almost better than the story.
Yeah.
And that's what's amazing about that, because I mean, of course, you've got Mary Shelley there, Percy Shelley, Byron. Wasn't Byron there? Yeah, all at the
Lord Byron.
Yep, all these great writers of their time. There at the it was a lake house, wasn't it, where they were all staying? And it was a wild and wet, wintry sort of night, blowing and blustering, and they all sat around to tell each other ghost stories at the table. And this is what she came up with. This is where the concept was born. And then they encouraged her to continue writing it because it was so good. And it just goes to show that to scare somebody, you don't necessarily have to have horror per se, but that mix of science fiction with horror and futuristic, but also terrifying in the fact that it's kind of a zombie thing. I mean,
to Sammy Jenkins, I do I enjoy like the pseudo horror, paranormal shows.
Yeah, that's okay. I like that.
Yeah. However,
Me too.
there is one episode that they always do that I can't handle. And that's the obligatory faith healer episode.
Have you watched the new Marvel series, Hellstrom?
No.
Hellstrom?
It's just been released on Hulu.
Yeah, I saw the first episode so far.
Oh. No, actually, it got released about a week ago on Hulu.
Yeah.
I've watched the first two. Really good. A bit slow, but I quite liking it as a story. It's about demons and but even though there's the church involved in everything, their concept of demons is more like other dimensional beings that live off fear and hate, basically, and pain.
Yeah, I know you meant the genre. I was just kind of piggybacking off of it because there's all and I wasn't talking just supernatural because Constantine did it too. If Hellstrom ends up being like, does Hellstrom look like it's going to be like some kind of Monster of the Week kind of show?
No, it's ongoing.
Okay, so Hellstrom probably won't have the obligatory Faith Heal episode. I haven't seen any of Buffy, but I bet Buffy does have an obligatory.
Oh, but Buffy's very much Monster of the Week.
Well, no,
Yeah.
I bet Buffy does have at least one obligatory Faith Healer episode.
I don't recall that in Buffy or Angel. I don't recall them having any faith healers per se. They get into pagans and stuff, but
you have magic, so you have magic that can heal and things like that.
Yeah.
But not necessarily faith healers. So,
but yeah, there it seems to be a trope in like the modern paranormal shows, and at least the ones that skew more Monster of the Week, where there's at least one episode where they encounter a faith healer that's actually, where it actually works, but things start going wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And coming from a Pentecostal background, that always kind of pushes the wrong buttons.
Yeah. Hellstrom is more like an strong overarching story.
Yeah.
Which, to be quite honest, you can probably figure out who the main protagonist is going to be by the end of the first episode. Yeah. Unfortunately, it's pretty, because I mean it's formulaic like the others, but the two lead actors are very good at their roles. Apparently, follow the comic really closely for them. Unfortunately, because of the type of story it is, and we've had a lot of them, it's easy to follow how the story is going to be going. But having said that, it's well put together. So I've quite enjoyed that.
Sammy Jenkins, I'll leave that in the chat, but I won't highlight it. Well, which
Willow
is actually
awesome.
kind of
Evil Willow was better.
Which is actually kind of funny, talking about how I can't stand obligatory faith healer episodes, because my favorite Stephen King novel isn't actually any of the classics. It's a newish one, because I think it was published in like 2006. Called Revival, which is about a faith healer. And it's really, really good up until the end where he tries to pull a Lovecraft, and it just kind of doesn't work, which is kind of par for the course for Stephen King.
I tend to find that from a lot of authors. It's making something that goes along the lines of a Lovecraft seems to be something really hard for people to pull off.
Yeah.
So I'm not even sure Lovecraft pulled it off all that well himself at times either.
Yeah.
So,
well, I like to make a Lovecraft thing work. I think it's got to be like. See, to make Lovecraftian horror work, you'd have to do it kind of one of two ways, in my opinion. Hypothesizing, just guessing, spitballing off the top of my head. Mm-hmm. Like the two ways I can see you making it work is, one, do it as kind of a slow burn mystery where things get weirder and weirder as things progress, but you've got to keep it very slow burn, very gradual, and then like pull the rug out from under them so slowly that they don't realize that the rug's been pulled out from under them.
Yeah.
And then the other way to do it would be to kind of do it like almost like a science fiction novel, like, set it in space and then have the creepy Lovecraftian shit start happening. Like, and just rush into the Lovecraftian shit and kind of make it kind of like a horror survival kind of issue.
Alien
That
with
sounds a
elder
little
gods.
That sounds a little like Event Horizon.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
Which I love, by the way.
Yeah, I knew there was a science fiction film that is used a lot of like used as a very as a regular example of Lovecraft done well, and it was Event Horizon. I just forgot the title. Probably because I haven't seen it.
Oh, we lost him. Here we go.
Dark. Yeah.
So, what do you think of Stranger Things? Then I've only seen the first couple of episodes.
I only saw the first season. The first season actually made its kind of Lovecrafty thing work.
Yeah.
Like they didn't quite go. They didn't quite go. Because, yeah, so the way the way it seems like the way how you do Lovecraft well is if people have trouble deciding whether or not it's actually Lovecraftian.
Yeah, Stranger Things would have to go close to being Lovecraftian.
Yeah, like it has Lovecraftian elements because, with the whole upside down.
Yeah. Yeah, and definitely Eldritch type horrors. So.
Yeah, the Demogorgon.
Yeah.
Would definitely fit the bill of a Lovecraftian horror. So
yeah.
And the way that it's like it's a steady theme throughout the entire season.
Yeah.
And like I said, it starts as something of a murder mystery. And you kind of get that slow build, and once the rug's out from under you.
And then, of course, you've also got the child mystery.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying is... Yeah. Oh, yeah, with 11, because who was 11?
Yes.
But that being said, it's kind of hard to say if Stranger Things is actually horror, because there are horror elements to it. But it's more of like a love letter to the 80s.
I haven't seen enough of it to judge that. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say...
I found it hard to get into it. I think maybe if I pushed through a few more episodes, I would have got into it. But I was like, at the time, I didn't want to.
Yeah, in fact, I'd say... Stranger Things is more of a kids on bikes story than a horror story.
It's E.T. with big scary aliens.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's so for those who aren't aware of the term, kids on bikes is the kind of genre of media that was mostly predominant in the 80s. Where
they're all copies of E.T. or what was that? I was going to say Ghoulies, but not Ghoulies.
The Goonies.
What was one?
The Goonies.
Ghoulies, Ghoulies, Gremlins to a certain extent.
Yeah, basically where a group of kids on bikes encounter something strange, and it's basically their adventures. Figuring it out, surviving it, or sheltering it and bringing it home in the case of E.T. That's a kids on bikes story. Technically, you could technically say, what's the Stand By? You could technically say Stand By Me might count as a kids on bikes story, kind of more of a coming of age.
Yeah, well, I mean, most of those
most of them are coming of age stories, but you could say Stand By Me is a kids on bike story without the fantastical elements.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. They put in the supernaturally elements to give the kids in the audience a bit of a shock and just to have another avenue of interest.
Yeah.
But yeah, there were an awful lot of them made.
Yeah.
I mean, Gremlins was probably a bit different because the kids were considered late high school, so they could drive. So it was kids with just getting their licenses driving, but it was still the same sort of concept as kids on bikes. Just a bit. The kids were a bit older. That's all. But yeah, Ghoulies and Goonies and that were all that sort of thing.
Yeah. I think Lost Boys might have been another one. Once again, we keep going on tangents where we're not really talking
about horror.
But I guess it could be because horror itself is a very amorphous genre that kind of works its way into other genres.
I mean, let's face it, the basic premise of things like Ghoulies and that are the idea is to bring in these minor horror elements like little monsters who are quite vicious and everything, and then have the kids solve the problem of it. So it's they have horror elements, but I mean, if you want to go for proper horror, Alfred Hitchcock, The Birds, or
because the thing is, horror itself is an umbrella genre because it's got a bunch of different other kinds of, like, for instance, you have your gothic horror, your Lovecraftian or cosmic horror, you have your psychological horror,
I think is the hardest stuff to watch. Yeah. Psychological horrors where they could almost be true things, but they're designed to creep you the hell out so you don't want to walk outside your front door. Yeah. That's the one. Because if they're supernatural, you're like, that supernatural's bullshit. So that's not going to happen to me. But if it's somebody being abducted and then having their ankles broken with a great big sledgehammer, that's scary.
Yeah.
And that was horrible to watch in the show. In the movie.
Although, if I may, and I could be remembering incorrectly or whatever, but I believe Hitchcock himself said he does not do horror. It actually does not do horror per se. He does thriller, suspense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there is
he considered that at least to be different, as I understand it.
And there is an argument for a distinction between thriller and horror, but especially when it comes to like psychological horror, there is a lot of overlap.
Yeah. I it's very hard to separate one from the other. I mean, if the intent of it is in the thriller is to scare someone and take them out of their element and put them into something which is going to terrify them, then you're moving into horror. Horror doesn't necessarily have to have supernatural elements. Yeah. I think that really narrows things down too much. I mean,
right. I never thought that either. That's why I always considered, supernatural horror to be like a specific subgenre of horror. And I definitely like that better. I like I like beings with unusual abilities over just people getting tortured or just a bunch of disgusting.
I couldn't watch something like
splatterpunk.
Yeah,
no, I've got no interest in slasher flicks or thingy.
Well, I have to say I liked Saw. I liked the first one, mainly because I did like that element of like, here's the solution to your problem, here's the key, but you got to dig into your own skin to get the key or whatever it is. Like, you have to push yourself through something damaging or die horribly. I kind of liked that element of it. That was the more psychological part. But when it gets just all about the, let's see how nasty we can be with the gore and stuff, and I definitely didn't like Hostel, because that was nothing more than sitting there watching somebody getting tortured, and I was just not entertained by that at all.
Yeah.
No. But I mean, if you want a good psychological thriller which borders on horror, yeah, you've got things like Silence of the Lambs and Silence of the Lamb and Hannibal and things like that, where you're
or
what about Identity? Did you ever see that one?
I've heard about
John
it.
Cusack, the Goodfellas guy, Frick. I can't remember his name.
Yeah. Or while Doc's thinking of it, a good
Ray Liotta. Sorry, go ahead.
A good thriller type horror. I'd actually recommend, even though it is a Christian thriller / horror novel.
Oh dear!
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. It's 3 by Ted Decker. Basically, the story is this, average Joe Schmo is suddenly the target of a serial killer / terrorist, and he doesn't know why, and he's got to figure it out, before things go horribly wrong. And
sorry.
I will say, well, spoilers for an obscure Christian novel. There is it is the twist is that he's the bad guy, in that it's like a badly, because of course in horror it tends to be a thing where people with mental health issues tend to get demonized. The protagonist and the antagonist are one and the same because of DID. And if I remember right, there's another personality as well, which is why it's called 3. But turns out he did some bad things, and he's trying to get himself to confess or whatever. He did some bad things they blocked out the memories of, and he's trying to get himself to confess. But yeah, the one subgenre of horror that I actually know anything about is Christian horror. Which is kind of odd that, evangelicals actually have a Christian horror subgenre.
You've reminded me of a psychological horror, and I can't remember the name of it. All right. I can describe it, and somebody might remember what it is. A girl gets adopted by a family, only she turns out to be an adult woman who has the disease where you don't age, and she's a psychopath. And starts killing people in the neighborhood, and wants to kill the mother because she's fallen in love with the father, and it's all really weird.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm familiar with that one. But
I can't remember what it's called.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, I need to know what it was called.
There was one somewhat recent one I haven't seen yet, the Orphan or something.
Yeah.
I wonder if that
I think that's actually is what it is.
But and so
it's Orphan.
Yeah.
Yep. Well done, Doc.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one yet. It looked interesting.
It is really good. It takes you a while to realize what's going on, and I know I've just spoiled it for anyone who hasn't seen it yet. But it is a really good story, worth watching. The way it leads out, and she is a complete nut job. So yeah,
groovy. Yeah, Identity. I almost can't say too much about without not only spoiling it but just plain ruining it. But I mean, I highly recommend it, and it does give itself away about maybe a little more than halfway through.
It sounds
it'll tell you what's going on, but it's it's so interesting, especially if you don't really know.
Also, another movie that's pretty good as a stealth horror movie is the second Riddick movie.
Oh, I like Riddick.
The one where he's on the desert planet.
Yeah,
because when it comes to the crew that's there, when that crew shows up, all the scenes that focus on that crew are shot like a horror movie. Are shot and directed like it's a horror movie, and Riddick is the monster.
Yeah.
So that's why I say it's a very good stealth horror movie. Because it's not technically a horror movie because the protagonist is also,
a good guy.
Well, the monster.
Yeah. Protagonist, the good guy is the monster.
Yeah.
I really liked that. I really liked that second Riddick movie. I'm assuming you're not counting Chronicles of Riddick as the second. Well, technically it was made second, but
to be fair, that the one I was describing is the only Riddick movie I've seen.
Okay, well, because there was Pitch Black was the first one.
Yeah.
And then the second one was Chronicles of Riddick, and technically the third one was the cartoon. And then it would be the fourth one as the one I think you're talking about. And I really like that one because it kind of brought it back to something more like the original Pitch Black.
Yeah.
Chronicles of Riddick, it was good and all, but it seemed to take the story off in a very different direction. I got a more Star Trek feel out of that one than an Aliens feel. Like the first one, I would say, is more like Aliens, or maybe the first Alien movie. I felt the last one kind of brought it a little more back.
Yeah.
To that sort of survival horror kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I did like them all. I thought they were really good. You keep what you kill.
So here's a question. Would you consider Michael Crichton a horror author?
Oh. Yeah.
I haven't read a hell of a lot of Michael Crichton. I don't think I've read any. But he did Jurassic Park, right?
He did.
Yeah, he did Jurassic Park. He did the book that The Abyss is based off of.
Yeah, I would say you'd have to call him a horror author. I mean, The Abyss is definitely horror.
Yeah. The Abyss is the movie in the deep sea station with the giant squids, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't what? Would you count Jaws as a horror?
So that at least a suspense.
It's definitely suspense.
Yeah.
I mean, I certainly wouldn't count the third Jaws as a horror. That was hilarious. I laughed my ass off through the entire movie.
Now, here's the question: are we drawing a line between thriller and horror? Because if we are, I'd say Jaws straddles that line.
Yeah, I don't know. There's so much crossover between thriller and horror.
Yeah.
I don't know that you can completely.
Well, I think it's less a line, more of a gradient.
I mean, Jaws is only as scary as swimming in a as any shark infested waters would be, and I mean, it's easy enough to stay away from Jaws. Just don't go bloody swimming. So, I don't put it in I can't quite put it in the same thing. No one's trapped by it. The people who go out to hunt the shark do that so of their own thing, and they know more or less what they're supposed to know what they're doing. You know, so I think yes, it's more of a thriller than it is. Definitely a thriller, but it's I don't know that horror in the same way that you some elements of horror are about losing your own initiative and your own power in it.
Yeah,
I think, and I don't think that Jaws has that.
Well, once again, I'd have to say it's in that fuzzy gradient.
It definitely is in the fuzzy gradient.
Yeah. Like for instance, because once we're talking about very big, very wishy-washy genres here. Because like you also have your action and spy thrillers, which I wouldn't call horrors.
Yeah. I mean, they tried to supersize Jaws when they did the Meg.
Yeah.
And I mean, let's face it. There is nothing horrific about the Meg.
No. Actually, the Meg is not a ripoff of Jaws.
No, but I mean, you supersize the shark, and it's supposed to give you more thrills and more horror. But I don't think it is in any way definitely a thriller, but I don't think it's a horror.
I actually have,
it's more of a comedy.
I actually have a joke about the Meg that I rather enjoy.
Go for it.
See, the Meg is a movie about about a bloodthirsty monster long thought dead rising to the surface. There's also a giant shark.
I haven't actually seen the Meg, but
yeah. The joke is the bloodthirsty monster being Jason Statham's career.
Yeah.
If I may, now that you mentioned Jaws, I can share. I've actually had a couple of proto virtual reality experiences in my life. These would, like before virtual reality became a thing, I experienced a basic form of that. Firstly, as I said, since you mentioned Jaws, in my hometown, town I was born in, the local swimming pool one night featured a showing of Jaws. So I got to watch Jaws while swimming.
Cool.
And the other one was when I was in college, and we were on a field trip to the Art Institute of Chicago, and the charter bus they rented that time had monitors and a VCR hookup. Yes, I'm old, and the instructor brought along Speed to watch on the bus. It was the first time I'd seen Speed as well. So yeah, I have a couple of proto virtual reality experiences.
Actually,
even worse if you're watching Jaws and you're swimming in the ocean.
Yeah, that would be cool. And then there's got to be some asshole swimming around with a fin strapped to his back. So
a hydraulic shark that you just swims up past everybody.
Well, actually,
let a dolphin in.
Apparently, the shark in Jaws was about as deadly, off camera as it was on.
Yeah,
because there are like a lot of production stories about Bruce malfunctioning in like really dangerous and terrifying ways. And actually, technological limitations is why Jaws works as a suspense flick, and which is probably why it works as a movie at all. It's because they had so much trouble getting the shark to work, the robot shark to work in the water. They had to shoot a lot of it from the perspective of the shark because they couldn't show the shark on screen because they couldn't get the bloody thing to work.
Yeah. And then, of course, they filmed a lot of it in pools and not actually in the...
Yeah.
And they had to use smart camera angles so they could get this... Because they have multiple models for the shark for doing different things. When you go onto the later versions of Jaws, they tried to go to using early CGI for some of the effects, and it just is dreadful.
Yeah.
Absolutely dreadful. Jaws 3D, the third one, is a shit movie. It's absolutely garbage. They actually have the shark swim backwards. Sharks can't do that.
And though that being said, the CGI in Jurassic Park is a lot better. Though that being said, the CGI in Jurassic Park isn't as extensive as people think it is.
Oh, there was a lot of animatronics for.
Yeah. But the thing is, they blended the two, and even today it's hard to pick out which is animatronic, which is CGI.
You know what? The one thing that really annoys me, and it's the first Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
When they've got the Triceratops, and they're looking at its poop, but dinosaurs pooped like sheep do in little bundles and they had this mound of poop. It's just what? That's not how that works at all. We've lost Doc again.
Yeah,
he's in and out.
Though that reminds me of an intro of a fan theory about Jurassic Park that I am very much on board with.
Yeah.
Is that John Hammond didn't bring the team to Isla Nublar to do any kind of safety inspection.
Yeah.
He brought them there to see if he could fool the experts, because he knew he didn't make real dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And because the thing is, like, it's a lot less so in the movie, but especially in the book, John Hammond is first and foremost a businessman and a showman. He's essentially a pseudo Walt Disney.
Yeah,
and
I don't think Disney wouldn't do this if they could.
Yeah, and the thing is, John Hammond got his canon. To Jurassic Park, John Hammond got his start doing flea fairs, flea circuses.
Yeah.
So basically, he didn't clone dinosaurs. He essentially just engineered things that look like what we thought dinosaurs were. Then, and the theory goes he brought all the experts to Isla Nublar to see if he could fool the experts before he went public.
That would make sense. It'd actually make more sense than what the storyline was in the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've moved away.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're kind of tangentially talking because Jurassic Park could conceivably be called a horror.
Well, it certainly has horror elements to it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's certainly a thriller.
Yeah.
And it certainly has. So if that is, what about something like Godzilla? Because you've got the big monster. You've got...
I'd say it depends. Because honestly, in regards to kaiju movies, and I'm even lumping King Kong in with this.
Yeah.
Though King Kong is less so. Kaiju movies tend to be, kaiju movies and stories tend to be more disaster flicks rather than horror.
Oh, that's true. They do too.
Because it's not like it isn't the fact that there's a monster there because we've established that monsters aren't necessary for horror.
Definitely not.
Though the question is, I mean, of course, everyone knows that Frankenstein isn't the monster.
No, well, no, Frankenstein is the monster. The monster isn't the monster.
No, but everyone, as the meme goes, everyone knows that Frankenstein is not the monster. But people who have read the book know that Frankenstein is the monster.
Yeah.
So I'll rephrase that. We've established that that horror doesn't need a creature.
Yeah.
To work as horror. But it needs a seems that for horror to work, or for horror to be horror, it needs a monstrous force, whether that be a human or a creature. But the thing is, it also needs to be somewhat personal. Because in regards to kaiju movies, Godzilla, King Kong, Gamera, etc., the horror or the monstrous force is more like a force of nature. Though I will make an exception because actually certain scenes from possibly the best video game movie ever made. I'm talking about Rampage, starring The Rock. Certain scenes in Rampage work very effectively as scenes from a horror movie.
Yeah.
Like the opening in the space station is one where you're not sure what's going on, and there's something in the vents, and the astronauts trying to get out of the burning space station, and then the monster gets them without you realizing what happened. And then the other scene from Rampage that I'd pick out as very horror movie is where Ralph Yeah, I think the wolf is Ralph, right? All right. Where the giant wolf takes out that army squad. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. Ralph is the wolf.
Yeah, Ralph is the wolf.
I think so.
Yeah, Ralph is the wolf, George is the ape, and
Lizzie.
And then there's Lizzie, which was in the game was a Godzilla ripoff, but in the movie they made it a giant saltwater crocodile.
Yeah. But yeah.
But
yeah, and my phone is not being kind to me today. I should just kind of put that out there. It keeps overheating. It usually doesn't overheat this bad, but then again, StreamYards is kind of rough on phones.
Yeah. So,
and I don't own a computer, so.
And actually taking those, you know what, taking those scenes and you know, describing them, you know, as horror does kind of bring us closer to, and hello, Paul Camish. Brings us closer to what could be conceivably a working definition. Because once again, like opposed to the rest of the movie, you know, the rest of the monster fight scene, attack and fight scenes in the movie, which are more akin to what you'd see in a normal kaiju movie, you know, where the giant animals are wrecking Chicago and whatnot, is those two specific scenes, you know, the one in the space station and the one with Ralph. They have a very narrow focus on either a person or a small group of people facing a monstrous force that they cannot comprehend. You know, facing a monstrous force and either surviving or dying horribly. In the case of those scenes in Rampage, they die horribly.
So would you consider disaster movies to be kind of a subgenre of horror?
I'm saying that there's a difference between a disaster movie and a horror movie.
Okay.
And it's a matter of scale, because and this is actually the point that I'm getting to is when it comes to, you know, the people going against, you know, the protagonist going against the monstrous force, whether it be human, animal, or supernatural.
Yeah.
It's a personal story. That seems to be the key that makes it horror. It's a very narrow focused personal story. When you branch it out to even like the size of a town or a city, you know, it becomes, you know, the horror aspect is diluted and it becomes just kind of a disaster flick. You know, something of a disaster thriller.
But having said that, you look at something like The Mist.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, ultimately, The Mist is not just one little town. It's a large area of the country, and you're talking about ultimately it's caused by eldritch horrors in the mist. And
but you know, in the context of the story,
it's only about them to start off. Yeah. Whereas if it had been them, everyone fighting, if it had branched out to the nation's military is now fighting these giant monsters, then it goes to being a disaster, almost alien invasions type movie, which isn't a horror.
Yeah.
The horror will be an alien invasion movie where you're... So this is where something like War of the Worlds, which deals with the whole invasion of these aliens from a personal level, could almost be a horror because it's very personal.
Yeah.
And each of the things that they encounter, like the aliens basically eating the humans and things, is a horror element to our hero.
Because so the War of the Worlds as okay. So the War of the Worlds even as written, because it does expand out slightly. But it, given the narrow focus of the protagonist, I will say that the War of the Worlds is a horror story. In fact, and this is a little teaser for next week when we are talking about the War of the Worlds.
Sorry.
It's a horror story about the horrors of imperialism.
In
fact, and there is a lot of overlap, between sci-fi and horror have had very friendly relationships over the.
Yeah. I mean, you can get down to disturbing stories which are almost horror in nature when you look at the personal movies that are about personal struggles for individuals, like 12 Years a Slave. There's almost horror type elements in that, in what the struggle this person went through, and yet there's nothing supernatural in there at all. It's a horrific story.
And
one I couldn't watch all the way through, by the way.
But so basically, what we're saying is the monster is the friends we made along the way.
Yeah.
but in that So, and of course, I can't speak on 12 Years a Slave. I haven't seen it.
Don't.
in something akin to that case, like if we were to analyze it under this horror model that we've established, the protagonist is the protagonist, the monstrous force
in this case is racism.
Well, in this case is slavery in the South.
Slavery in the South, yeah. And the horrific things that this individual went through, but it's all from his perspective, so it's very tied down.
So would 127 hours be a horror story?
Oh.
I haven't seen that one either.
So about the guy who got stuck in the canyon, then had to cut his own arm off to get out?
I guess I hadn't heard of that one.
No, it's
like a real story.
It's a thing that actually happened a couple years back. I think 2012-ish.
Oh, really?
But this hiker got stuck in this canyon for 3 days, and ended up having, his arm was pinned under a boulder. He ended up having to self-amputate
with a pocket knife.
Yeah, with a pocket knife.
Oh my God!
And he he made it out. Well, 127 hours is the movie based on his story.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I mean, he was at the point where if he didn't do something, he was going to die anyway.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was where he was at. But it was the horror. I don't know that it was. It's terrific watching the fact that he had to cut his arm off.
Yeah.
But I think the horror was the endurance of those 3 days.
Yeah.
The situation he was in.
Yeah. The monstrous. In this model, the monstrous force that the protagonist is set against is just cold, unfeeling reality.
Yeah.
Well, and that seems like the element I enjoyed from Saw. That was the one part I liked about it. I generally don't really like the movie Saw, but that aspect of it, that having to make that decision to grievously and potentially permanently injure yourself or die. What will it take to push yourself, through all of your built-in safeguards to not injure yourself?
Yeah.
In order to survive,
So in that sense, a survival movie can be a suspenseful horror.
Yeah.
As well, in that sense.
Yeah.
So the Poseidon Adventure, I mean, I know it's aged now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have a cruise ship tip over, everybody dies except 10 people, and they have to climb through the infrastructure so they don't die. Mm-hmm. And more people die along the way. I mean, that's definitely within that ilk.
Or like talking about like I don't think there's any movies based off of it, but I could very well be easily wrong.
Mm.
The Jack London story, To Build a Fire.
Yeah.
It's all about him trying to, the protagonist is stuck out in a blizzard and he's trying to survive the night.
Oh yeah.
Or
I think we did that short story. Was it a short story?
Yeah, it's a short story.
Yeah, I think we did that when I was in high school. We studied it or whatever.
Or the opening of White Fang could very much be a horror movie, called a horror story.
Yeah.
Because it focuses on, this one sled dog team, these, miners or whatever, traveling through the wilderness, being stalked by a pack of wolves. And of course, they all die horribly.
And if you die horribly, it's got to be a horror.
Well, because I don't know, because you can die horribly without it being a horror, but
yeah, in comedy, sure.
Yeah, a fairly high death count does seem to be something, a high casualty count for the cast size. Or for the named protagonist size, seems to be something of a requirement.
Yeah, but that doesn't fit in with Misery, and that's definitely
yeah. Well, see, casualty doesn't necessarily mean death.
Well, that's true, and definitely the amount of pain and infliction that she puts on.
Yeah. And
there are some fates worse than death.
Yeah. Yeah, having your legs nobbled. I mean, the ending scene when he meets the other woman in the restaurant and she goes, "I'm your biggest fan," and there's a look on his face.
I haven't seen Misery. I've read it. That was enough for me. I don't think I'll come within 10 feet of Misery.
No, Misery is a movie. It absolutely tears you apart. I really couldn't,
especially if you've I'm gonna say this, and I don't usually recommend avoiding media. For those of you who watch this channel, I'm very much anti-censorship, but there is a difference between censorship and self-care.
Yeah.
I will say, if you've had any kind of experience even adjacent to a stalker, avoid Misery like the plague.
Misery is a mind fuck.
Yeah, it's a good book, but it's a good story, but it is a very, very triggering story. And of course, horror is kind of a triggering genre.
There's a few movies like that. The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. That's a hard movie to watch.
Yeah.
And a hard book to read.
Yeah.
As I said, 12 Years a Slave, I couldn't get through it. I think I watched the first half an hour and I'm like, there's no way I can watch this. This is just too much. And there's quite a few movies like that where they're obviously brilliant movies and great stories, and that especially if they're telling real stories.
Yeah.
But just to put yourself through them is traumatic.
Yeah.
In and of itself. So yeah.
I think I saw the what'd you say that was, the white striped pajamas?
The boy in the striped pajamas.
The boy in the striped pajamas. Yeah, I think I saw that one. That was the one where it was the kid befriends a Holocaust prisoner, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God, that one was.
Oh, that is so hard to watch.
Wow. Yeah. That one was heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not a horror though. That one's, although the last bit of it is definitely horrific.
Yeah.
But spoilers. But yeah, I wouldn't call the movie itself a horror.
Right.
Definitely suspenseful though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just way too close to reality. That's part of the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, it's meant to be, but it's
sometimes people need a dose of reality like that too.
Yeah.
It can be bad for some people, but
it is a good movie.
Yeah.
You can't deny that. It's just a big box of tissues, and don't watch it alone.
Yeah. It's good to engage with media because media is how we communicate themes and ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But the things you gotta remember when you're engaging with media is, one, engage with it critically.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that one's half important. Because there are always your stupid popcorn flicks. Even those have their own themes. So, engage critically with the media you're participating in, lest you fall victim to propaganda. And two, take care of yourself.
Yeah.
If you
most assuredly,
if you have anxiety triggers or PTSD triggers, then and engaging with certain forms of media will trigger attacks, I do not recommend engaging with those forms of media.
I've known people who flat out don't like horror movies at all. They say they get nightmares and stuff, and if that's what it does to you, by all means, don't do it.
Yeah.
If you don't like it, don't do it. It's fine. And on the other side of that door, maybe people lighten up on people who don't like horror movies.
Yeah.
Don't give them too much shit, because it's definitely not for everyone.
Yeah, like for instance, me and Misery. I read Misery.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never watch the movie. Never read it again. Once was enough.
Well, there you go. Stay away from it if you don't want
I've only seen it once. I've only seen the movie, so I never read the book, and I wouldn't now, and I wouldn't watch it again. But I can still remember the worst parts of it vividly.
Yeah.
It's something that will stick with me. And as it was described in the book, what the things that she did, they showed them graphically.
The fun fact about one of the most famous psychological horror movies out there, is that it wasn't objectionable because of all the violence in it. You know what was actually objectionable to the MPAA? in Psycho?
What?
The fact that it showed a toilet.
Oh, I remember that.
Oh,
yeah.
for fuck's sake.
Yeah. The yeah. Yeah, Psycho is the first movie to show a working toilet. And
no.
And it caught a ton of flack for that, but it didn't catch any flack for anything else in the movie.
And yeah, it is a psychological thriller that messes with people's heads.
Yeah. And
I don't even remember. I don't remember seeing the toilet. It's so not a thing. I don't.
Yeah.
It was like not even.
Also, thing is, there was a big there was actually a thriving horror comics industry in the in the golden age of comics.
Yeah.
But the Comics Code Authority, because of the work of Dr. Wortham and all the negative attention it brought up and the fears that they would be censored, that the comics industry would be censored by the government if they didn't censor themselves, they outright banned any and all horror elements in comics.
Yep. I forget which one it was. I was just watching like some kind of documentary on this recently.
Yeah.
But they weren't allowed to use the word zombie. And they had zombies. And they had to call it something else. They had to make up some weird name for it.
Well, yeah, they also weren't allowed to have werewolves or vampires or have the word horror on the title, on the cover of a comic.
Vault of Horror.
Yeah.
How about we talk about a classic movie that came out in the year I was born, The Exorcist?
Haven't seen it.
You haven't?
No.
Oh. Because, I mean, that really started the trope of the whole possession movies with the priests trying to get rid of the demons and all that things. I mean, the head spinning around in the 73, for goodness sake. And the whole walking down the stairs.
Yeah. Honestly,
and head turned around. It was amazing special effects for the time, but it was it was really, really creepy. I mean, it's very aged now, but it was very creepy.
And having been exorcised, I don't think I will watch The Exorcist.
Well, it's not realistic, so.
Well, yeah, but that being said,
So, but if we're going to move on from a classical, not classical, but that 70s, 80s horror movies, Poltergeist.
There you go.
So hold on. I mean
the original, not the sequels, which were nowhere near as good.
I'm gonna have to check something to see if this actually falls into the era we're talking about.
I believe Poltergeist
it's
late 70s, wasn't it? Poltergeist.
What I was gonna mention is way outside what we're actually going to the era we're talking about.
Oh no, sorry, 82's Poltergeist. I thought it was earlier than that.
But yeah,
I mean, it's a Steven Spielberg film. I mean, for one thing.
Yep.
What I was going to bring up didn't come out until 1997.
Which movie was that one?
Devil's Advocate.
Oh.
Keanu Reeves and Al Pacino.
Yep.
I like that one.
Yeah.
My one of my favorite all-time movie quotes is "Vanity, my favorite sin."
Yeah.
I love it. I love it so much.
Good movie.
And yeah, Devil's Advocate is very much a horror movie.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some great horror movies. And I prefer that horror style to the slasher type style like you got out of Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, and that. Although Nightmare on Elm Street was a mind fuck because you never really knew when they were in or out of the dream.
Yeah, and also in regards to Devil's Advocate, it straddles the line between psychological and supernatural horror.
Yeah.
Because the supernatural elements of the horror are very, very subtle. And the way the film is written and directed and acted, it could be argued that there's nothing really supernatural going on up until the end. And
yeah.
And that is mostly because,
well, that's supposed to be how the devil works is through subtlety.
Well, and even at spoilers for over 20-year-old movie, but how at the end everything goes back to the beginning of the movie. It could it could be argued that it was all in Keanu Reeves' head the entire time.
Yeah.
Like the entire movie just took place in a split second in his mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'd almost venture to say it could be, I don't know about argued so much, but interpreted as to be without the supernatural element completely.
Yeah.
The whole thing could have been considered, in a person's mind.
Especially since, Keanu Reeves is a good old homeboy from the, good old church-going homeboy from the South.
Yeah, and what sort of imagery do religious people experience when their mind goes nuts?
Yeah. And, he's in a very, stressful situation because he's defending a client that he knows is guilty.
Yeah.
Of something rather horrific, which we will not.
And that triggers his own guilt.
Yeah.
And guilt can fuck up your brain, dude.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Definitely. I really do like I do like that kind of genre where there's a bit of supernatural element, but mostly it's a bit of a mind fuck.
Yeah. What'd be interesting is if you had like a Lovecraftian. I'm not going to say version or adaptation, but if you took the structure of Devil's Advocate, the where you're not sure if it's just in his mind or if there's actual supernatural shit going on, and made it look Lovecraftian instead of centered around the Christian hell mythos.
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could almost have like a Western style monster hunter with eldritch horrors fighting off the hell, which would be kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, now here's another question: is like, are Monster Hunter movies about monster hunters, like for instance Van Helsing or Blade, are they horror?
I was actually going to mention Van Helsing.
Yeah.
Mainly because it has another of my favorite lines. I don't know if I really like the movie in general all that much. It's kind of, it's all right. It's kind of fun to watch, I guess, but it does have one of my favorite lines this is kind of a spoiler, I guess, but when Dracula's trying to get the Wolfman to work for him or whatever, the Wolfman goes, "I'll die before I ever help you," and Dracula goes, "Don't be boring. Everyone who says that dies." Just one of my favorite lines, and it's more comedic than anything. So
yeah. So
but that is interesting. That is interesting to bring that up because I almost don't consider that a horror. Almost more action adventure / comedy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because
I mean, I would accept it being considered horror, but
yeah, or
it's an action adventure comedy with horror elements.
Or like there, there is a question as to whether like, things like Van Helsing, like Blade, like Supernatural, like Constantine, whether or not they're actually horror, because the protagonists aren't as outclassed by the monstrous forces they're facing as most horror protagonists are. They're
on the equal. I mean, that's where you look at something like Supernatural. They're mostly up to the task.
Yeah. I mean, in the early seasons, it could more easily be argued horror. In the earlier seasons, but then when you get the power creep going on, and
they know what they're doing by that point. They know how to use magic themselves. They know how to do things, and they've got a bloody angel on side.
Yeah.
It's a little different from a superhero comic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny is because
which is what Blade basically is. Blade's a superhero comic with vampires in it.
Well, yeah. Blade
literally from Marvel Comics.
Yeah, literally from Marvel Comics.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think you're almost looking at the Monster of the Week thing is not necessarily horror.
Yeah.
It can be more action and comedy and things.
Depending on how it's actually, I can think of a Marvel superhero that we have seen in the MCU that could potentially be the protagonist of a horror movie.
Already seen in an MCU movie?
Yeah, we
Doctor Strange?
Nope.
As a protagonist, yes, Doctor Strange could be.
Arguably, you have that issue where he's not technically a protagonist, horror, where it's not technically horror because he's on somewhat equal footing.
Yeah.
Right.
But
he's outsider.
So you're. Let me try to better understand your question because I'm weird.
Yeah. Okay.
So you're talking about more of a non-superhero horror protagonist in Marvel.
Well, the thing is, this character I'm thinking of is both the protagonist and the monstrous force that the protagonist must strive against.
The Hulk.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. You could do the Hulk as a Jekyll and Hyde horror movie.
You could. Well, I mean, that's exactly what the Hulk is. Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty much, he's a mixture of Jekyll and Hyde and Frankenstein's monster. Like the image of the Hulk was originally inspired by Firebird. But yeah, he most definitely is Jekyll and Hyde. Certainly.
Yeah.
That's the two monsters he's directly inspired from.
Though arguably he's more removed from arguably you could say he's more removed from Frankenstein's monster than he is from Jekyll and Hyde, because if I remember right, the chain is like his design originally was kind of a ripoff of Solomon Grundy, the DC character.
Who is definitely Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah. No, who is definitely kind of a ripoff of Frankenstein's monster.
Oh, yeah. No, that's true. No,
aesthetically, at least.
Yeah.
I believe I saw an interview with Stan. It was either Stan Lee or somebody else saying that that the Hulk was definitely a blend of Jekyll and Hyde and Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah.
But yeah, and you do have that creation from energy element, I suppose. They used gamma rays instead of, say, electricity.
Yeah.
So maybe not so far removed from Frankenstein's monster, but then on the other hand, so was Jekyll and Hyde a science experiment gone awry.
Yeah.
So
in the case of Jekyll and Hyde, the real monster was in fact Victorian repression.
Yeah.
Or in other
I'm not as familiar with Jekyll and Hyde. I liked the series. What was it called? Jekyll. I don't know if you all ever saw that, the BBC series. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
Where he's like a descendant of the actual Jekyll and Hyde.
What about the Invisible Man then?
So the Invisible Man, well, the thing is, a lot of, when you think about it, and especially if you apply our model, a lot of H.G. Wells works fall under horror. Or at least the more prominent ones. Like, for instance, The Time Machine.
Oh, yeah. The
Time Machine, like, especially in the chunk of it where he's stuck in the future with the Morlocks and the Eloi. That's a horror story.
Oh, yeah.
I'd actually never thought of that as a horror. I always thought of that as sci-fi because time travel is such a sci-fi trope. So
but you get science fiction horrors all the time. I mean,
right?
Even something like Doctor Who has a trope of them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Or the Daleks, the Cybermen. Come on, they're definitely horror elements.
Yeah.
And actually, but anyways, we'll veer back to the Invisible Man. But I did think of it's not it's not recognized as universally recognized as a horror movie, but I did think of a horror movie from the 70s that I've seen.
Okay.
2001: A Space Odyssey.
Oh, that's definitely a horror story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, the evil thing ends up being the computer.
Yeah.
But they caused it even better. But
the
monster is the computer.
When you apply our model to it, 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Space horror.
It is a space horror.
Definitely.
Cool.
Oh God, I had something in my head a moment ago. Now my brains have leaked out. No.
Yeah.
What was that I was thinking of? Definitely the Invisible Man is definitely got horror elements of it.
Oh yeah.
A lot of them.
Now, though, the thing is, in regards to the Invisible Man, like it's one of those horrors where it's a small community against the monstrous force type of horror, less a single protagonist against a monstrous force. And of course, we're talking about H.G. Wells' Invisible Man, not the other Invisible Man.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Definitely H.G. Wells.
Actually, a lot of H.G. Wells, even though he's more seen as a sci-fi author, and of course, when we're talking about, late 18th, the Victorian.
Day of the Triffids.
Oh yeah, Day of the Triffids is definitely a survival horror. Most post-apocalypses can easily fall under horror.
Yep.
What
about Night of the Lepus?
But what I was going to say is, in regard, while we're still on the topic of H.G. Wells, I was going to mention the Island of Dr. Moreau.
We should cover that in detail next week.
Yeah. Oh, I have a feeling that we're just gonna have to we're gonna have to we're gonna have to cover each well-known H.G. Wells story on its own.
Probably.
Mm-hmm.
So another great author of the ilk, Oscar Wilde, Dorian Gray.
Oh yeah, The Portrait of Dorian Gray.
Dorian Gray.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that's definitely a horror story.
Yeah.
And yet it's a horror purely from Dorian's perspective.
Yeah.
Because of how he's living.
Yeah, it's like half psychological, half body horror.
Yeah.
And that is one aspect of horror that we haven't quite covered yet.
But if we want to cover that, there's another author we have to include in that, and that's Edgar Allan Poe.
Oh yeah. But in the case, but we're taught, where the protagonist, where the horror isn't necessarily being applied by an outward monstrous force. Is the horror that the protagonist is going against, or that the horror is that the protagonist is trying to deal with, is a monstrous change inflicted on them.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And the first look of Dorian Gray, you'd think that he has no horrors. He is perfect. He has no issues. He does what he wants, and then you realize the way he's living just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And of course, we can't talk about classic horror without talking about Edgar Allan Poe.
The Telltale Heart.
Yeah. Which is a psychological horror, and I said it before when we were talking about Bradbury, and I'll say it again. Fruit at the bottom of the basket is the better Telltale Heart, and you can fight me on that. I will throw fists.
Poe's is earlier.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, definitely a horror prose.
Yeah.
The Telltale Heart and The Raven.
Yeah, the Raven is a horror poem about dealing with loss.
It is. Poe just captures that stuff just beautifully. It's
though actually my favorite Poe story isn't necessarily one of his horror ones.
Oh, okay.
It's the 1002nd Arabian Night.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's one of the more obscure ones. But basically Scheherazade goes to see the Sultan for the 1002nd night, and tells story is supposedly about the eighth voyage of Sinbad. And the thing is, she goes through telling this story. Every single thing, every single fantastical element she mentions has a little footnote attached to it, explaining how it is in fact a real thing, or scientifically accurate as to the understanding of the time.
Yeah.
Like she, like, and like one of the things like described as like a submarine, all these supposedly fantastical at that time things, but were real in regards to, Victorian understanding. And then, but the thing is, after she finishes, the Sultan disbelieves her and orders her executed. That's how the story ends. With the whole point of the story being, that truth is stranger than fiction.
Fiction. Yeah. Yeah,
well, that's a bummer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's an Edgar Allan Poe story. That's kind of.
Did you expect it to have a happy ending?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we've covered this well,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
well, I was going to mention how much do you think fantasy crosses over into horror? Like, I got to thinking about the movie Legend.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of fantasy horror. I mean, in a sense, I mean, anything with eldritch horror is a fantasy horror.
Yeah.
So yeah. I mean, you just look at the elements that you find in, say, Dungeons and Dragons, where you get horror elements that come into Dungeons and Dragons.
Technically, a lot of those were ported from Lovecraft.
Yes, but I mean, Lovecraft in that sense is fantasy horror.
Though, actually, I can think...
As well as space horror.
Actually, I can think of horror elements that you can find in the example of fantasy, that being The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien.
Definitely.
Yeah, I was going to say,
arguably,
didn't that influence a lot of D&D too? Is that where they get their elves and dwarves and stuff?
But arguably, Frodo's entire character arc is a psychological horror.
Oh, for him, yes, definitely.
Played out, with him striving against the monstrous power of the ring.
A thing that he's already seen he's met somebody else who failed it in Schmiegel.
Yeah.
Gollum.
Yeah. So he's there as a reminder of the consequences if he fails his quest.
Yeah, so...
And yet it's Gollum that saves the quest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Though I will say in you can have horror elements in fantasy. However, when it comes to fantasy, you also cross into the Monster Hunter problem, where your protagonist could potentially, be on a footing to where it's not really horror anymore.
Yeah.
Though
I don't know about that, because Frodo never grows beyond the horror that he faces. I mean, effectively, Frodo fails.
Yeah.
It without Sam, and even without Gollum, Frodo was never going to get there.
Yeah.
So Frodo's journey is one of failure. The hero is Sam.
Yeah. Or another good example of horror done well in fantasy, and people, and I may lose subscribers over this, because I am going to talk about someone who is kind of generally regarded as kind of a hack. I'm going to talk about Christopher Paolini and Aragon.
Aragon. I love Aragon. It's a great story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never read the books, but I heard the movie was quite a departure. I did enjoy the movie enough. I mean, it was all right in and of itself.
The movie was a terrible adaptation. Now, Aragon,
but it wasn't a bad movie.
Aragon, Aragon itself is a very, kind of straightforward high fantasy type, story.
Mm-hmm.
Where we get our horror element is the subplot involving the Razak. And, in their city where they are hiding in this temple, and they because the Razak in the Aragorn lore are essentially the predator of humanity. How like the fish instinctively fears the osprey. How the osprey is perfectly crafted by evolution, to go after fish. The Razak is to humans as the osprey is to the fish. And you don't really see them that much. But when they show up, it's bad news, especially when it turns out that they've got their own mounts, which are actually their kind of adult stage, because they're rather insectile. But eventually, spoilers for Aragon, the Aragon series. Aragon, confronts the Razak and defeats them. And then he's got like there's one left at his mercy. And it begs him for its life, or if it must die, that it will at least be remembered as the shadow in the night. Because it's kind of their deal is that they are the thing we're supposed to be afraid of. It's kind of their purpose in existence, because of course we're talking about fantasy, and prescriptive destinies and purpose is kind of a trope of that genre. But the thing is, Aragon denies it and he kills it. And then the rest of it, the rest of that arc is kind of him having to live with the weight that he had committed a genocide and even wiped out the memory of a creature that would, that had existed.
Yeah. Which, of course, isn't done in the movie at all.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, the thing is, the movie only covers the first book. This scene is like near the end of the third.
So the first book is Aragon. The second is Brasinger.
The third's Brasinger.
So that's in Brasinger.
Yeah. It's Aragorn, eldest, Brasinger, and then
I've only read the first one. So
yeah.
I know the other ones. I have them. Have not read them.
Yeah. So, it seems like if you're gonna put horror elements in like a fantasy setting, you kind of have to lean more on psychological horror rather than outright supernatural horror.
Yeah, because you've already got the supernatural everywhere anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, and I forgot what else I was going to say. So, any further final thoughts?
No, I think we've covered it.
Yeah.
Doc?
I guess not.
Yeah.
I've run out of thought juice.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
This is midnight here, though.
So, we'll go ahead and move on to shilling. Doc Fearsome.
Well, I'm not a content creator myself, so probably not much to do on my channel except watch my my huge list of likes. It's probably over 2,000 now. But I don't know if I can. I don't often shout out Purple Rhymes with Orange, and that's strange because I hang out on his channel too. So we'll do a little shout out to we'll do a shout out to dear old Purple. He's very good person.
Yep. He is.
It's always a fun time on his channel. So
yeah.
And
what have I got? Well, as people can see, I'm away at the moment, so yeah, and I'm not getting any pre-records done at the moment, although I should be able to once I get back again. So but while I'm away, I'm hoping to do another Stump Gen stream. I really enjoyed the one the other night where I did the whole stream solo, which was hard work but good fun. Although the next one I probably won't be solo. I'm hoping to have Not a Doctor on with me, so you'll really be able to hammer us about physics and stuff.
Yeah.
And he'll make me look
an
like
actual
I'm
doctor.
Yeah. Well, he's doing his PhD at the moment, so he's not a doctor.
Not quite there yet, but
Not
far more along
yet.
than I am.
Or more along than I am too. But I mean, I can kind of hold my own, but there's avenues he will go down. Somebody asked me a question on Saturday. It's at my Saturday night, so about lasers, and I know I could explain how a laser works, and I can explain the basics of it and all that, and I know how I've used lasers, but he's a laser expert, and I really wish he'd been there because he would have been able to answer it properly.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. So it'd be nice to have that. I'm also planning on doing one at some point with Mero as well. So people who want to throw up chemistry questions, I'm not going to stumble through them because I'm dreadful at chemistry. So, but it's fun. It's fun having answering questions from the community. So people can expect one of those during the week at some point.
Yep. And so next week, I'm going to do a Halloween style one shot for secular D&D.
Cool.
So instead of secular D&D, it will be spookular D&D. And everyone who is watching will hear it here first. We're doing something vaguely Ghostbusters-y.
Yeah. And that's it because we don't want to get shut down.
Yeah. And of course, next week we are discussing the War of the Worlds, and I will be dusting off my what's his name?
Yeah, I know who you mean.
Richard Burton impression.
Richard Burton, yeah. And we will definitely have some War of the Worlds like music to go with it.
And with that, Doc, do you have any taglines?
Kind of, but I'm like on the spot and my brain's not working. It's not letting me do it.
Yeah, fair enough. So remember, indoctrination is a hell of a selfie stick, and don't choke on it.
Bye.
Bye.